Well, here we are. We've arrived. Tomorrow is your day, ladies and gentlemen. May I wish you all the very best of luck as you carry out your appointed task. This is Richard Martin here with your wake-up call on Monday, November the 7th, 2016, talking to you from a very far-away country, Malaysia, in the heart of Southeast Asia. As we conclude the final stretch of this vitriolic, deplorable, venomous, propaganda-saturated, deceitful, rigged presidential election spectacle, it becomes painfully obvious that the country is careening towards bloodshed, bedlam, confrontation, and civil war. The linear fixated establishment, which fancies itself intellectually superior to the irredeemables, is too blinded by its sociopathic, increasingly audacious subversion of the Constitution to grasp the level of rage and disillusionment of a white working class that has been screwed over for decades. As the Wall Street shysters frantically accelerate their embezzlement of what remains of middle-class wealth, with the Fed and the corporate media propagandists as their wingmen, the country devolves into a corporate fascist state. The disposition of the nation grows dark like the sky before an approaching deadly blizzard. As passions boil over and violence portends, the country hastens towards a bloody decade ahead with an uncertain climax. If you think this is just hyperbole, you either haven't studied history, or your cognitive dissonance and normality bias prevent you from seeing the unavoidable societal altering clashes, which occur like clockwork on an 80-year cycle, when the portents are right in front of your eyes. Historian Arnold Toynbee's Great War cycle that arise every 80 years or so aligns perfectly with generational theory. Great wars occur when the generation that doesn't remember the last catastrophic war ascends to leadership of the country. We are 8 years into a crisis period which won't end until at least the mid-2020s. As this bitterly vicious presidential campaign accelerates towards a finale which will leave the country divided and irate, the hostile opposing forces will be seeking revenge, retribution, and retaliation, no matter the outcome. You only have to observe the Federal Reserve zero interest rate policy and how it has ruined the economic system, creating disincentives to saving and encouraging warped, debt-driven speculation. And that was in 2011. The Fed keeping interest rates near zero on behalf of a corrupt establishment for the last 8 years has been the primary factor in creating anger and disillusionment. This tumultuous presidential election and its equally turbulent primaries have been fueled by the dreadful self-serving response of the establishment to the 2008 Wall Street-created financial collapse, the geopolitical anarchy created by US interventionism in the Middle East, the civic decay created by a falling government educational system, rampant debt-financed materialism, enabled and encouraged by the financial media complex, and racial division facilitated by the President and his social justice warrior brethren. The rescue of Wall Street and the destruction of Main Street by the Fed, Wall Street, and the captured politicians of both parties in Washington, D.C. has created the angry, acrimonious, throw-the-bums-out mood boiling over in flyover America. The widening, massive gap in wealth between the haves and have-nots was produced by solutions from sociopaths in suits, and it has reached the pitchfork and torch level. The linear-thinking ruling class has been in denial since this crisis catalyzed in September 2008. Their looting, pillaging and ransacking campaign was designed to enrich and empower a small cadre of shadowy, powerful, wealthy men, and it had been successful for decades. When you control the currency and interest rates, rig the financial markets, buy the politicians, write the laws and regulations, own the corporate propaganda machines known as the mainstream media, operate a high-tech surveillance state, create a dumbed-down populace through government school indoctrination, distract the masses with eye gadgets, reality TV, hero worship, professional sports, social media, irrelevant cultural issues, and literally thousands of other modern-day bread and circuses, you become arrogant and careless. These sociopaths are so consumed with the ravenous fleecing of the middle class, waging wars for profit and shredding the Constitution. They failed to recognize 2008 for the seismic, earth-shattering event that will change everything. The mood of the country shifted like tectonic plates beneath the nation. The mood continues to grow dimmer as the peasants grow poorer and the modern-day aristocracy consisting of Wall Street bankers, corporate executives, corrupt politicians, shadowy billionaires accumulate obscene, ill-gotten wealth through their complete capture of the system. Not all sociopaths wield knives and knotted cords. Some wear suits and are exceptionally intelligent and articulate, obsessively driven, and are able to use and undermine the law and the rules for their advantage. Like weapons. It's never about the win, never about the money. It's about the kill, not necessarily with ropes and knives, but with power and money and the subversion of law. Lawlessness is their addiction, their will to power. When societies become lax and complacent, these sociopaths can possess great political power through great amounts of unprincipled money. And over time, they become almost anti-human, destroyers of all that offends their insatiable sickness. They twist the public against itself and turn a broad sweep of society into their killing grounds. This is the undeniable lesson of the last few decades. There really are monsters, and they really do walk among us. The American people were numbed by the Great Depression and the bloody initial battles of the Civil War. They just let FDR and Lincoln do whatever they needed to do. Based upon the reaction of the citizens over the last 10 months, the dire problem facing the nation, perceived as the largest threat to the future, happens to be the deep state establishment currently ruling the country. The captured mainstream media running both political parties were completely stunned, horrified and frustrated at the unprecedented success achieved by the two anti-establishment candidates, Trump and Sanders. This election was supposed to follow the script as planned and coordinated by the establishment, with Hillary Clinton defeating Jeb Bush and continuing the corrupt status quo policies agreed to by the bought-off leaders of both parties. They miscalculated the mood of the country and the whirlwind of change seeking to sweep away the stubborn remnants of a crooked, decrepit, putrid existing social order. We are seeing the reaction of critical thinking Americans as they come to the realization that the system is rigged against them. A revolutionary spirit is once again rising among the deplorables. The Civil War was an internal struggle between the industrial North and the agrarian South. The Civil War disestablished states' rights, slavery, agrarian society, and constitutional rights. The resolution felt more like defeat, with the country exhausted, bitter, and angry. The country had exhausted itself, spilling the blood of over 1 million men. The new high after an atonement cycle is like a cold, miserable, rainy, dark spring. The Great Depression and World War II established a new world order led by the United States. As the only major country left unscathed by the ravages of global war, the US became the producer for the world, whose dollar was unquestioned as the currency of global trade. The new high was unleashed with fanfare and adulation. It was like a delightfully warm spring with flowers blooming and children frolicking. We are now in a life-or-death struggle between the ruling class of sociopathic bankers, corporate elites, and sleazy politicians versus the oppressed and infuriated middle class. The lying, deceit, rigging, deception, theft, and other crimes perpetrated by the ruling elites will be atoned for. The revelations from Edward Snowden, Julian Assange, and Bradley or Chelsea Manning prove the government and politicians to be lying, corrupt, immoral, sociopathic traitors to the Constitution. They have undermined the last vestiges of trust in the system and the establishment. The alignment of generational dynamics will provoke the responses to events moving forward. America has been badly led. A silent coup by deep state perpetrators has led to the complete capture of its economic, financial, judicial, and political systems. A vast swath of the populace has been lured into living beyond its means. The existing system is unsustainable. The boomer generation does not want to yield on its perceived entitlements. The millennial generation is saddled with unpayable debts, living in its parents' basements, working the night shift at Ruby Tuesday. Generation X is trapped in the middle of this generational struggle. The huge economic imbalances have been created by politicians buying votes and engineering wealth inequality to benefit the few. They have built up over decades like floodwaters behind a weakening levee. When the levee breaks, the morally bankrupt criminal social order will be swept away in the raging torrent to follow. The 2008 financial crisis was horrific, scary, and it was an eye-opener for those who blindly believed what they were told by their establishment zookeepers. Trust in the system has further disintegrated. This presidential election has further deepened this distrust of the entrenched establishment. The coming bust for stocks, bonds and real estate will knock out the supports for the dwindling remaining trust in this crooked system. The coming decade will be atonement for decades of bad choices, corrupt leadership, living beyond one's means, waging wars of choice across the globe, believing blatant falsehoods, exhibiting willful ignorance, ignoring facts, and a general failure to uphold the Constitution. Americans living in America will not escape the consequences. The death and destruction headed America's way will engulf the innocent as well as the guilty. I'm reminded of the penultimate scene in Clint Eastwood's dark, brooding, vengeful western Unforgiven, when little Bill Daggett laments to killer of women and children, William Money, that he doesn't deserve to die this way. Money responds, "Deserve's got nothing to do with it." Then he pulls the trigger. This is the kind of future we will be dealing with, whether we like it or not. Let me spend a few moments talking about how the election tomorrow could actually be rigged. By now, states have had plenty of warning since a damning report by the Brennan Center for Justice about voting machine vulnerabilities, which came out last September. Surely matters must have improved since then? Well, not exactly. In fact, not really at all. According to the Brennan Center's Lawrence Norden, and I quote, "People weren't thinking about voting system security or all the additional challenges that come with electronic voting systems. Moving to electronic voting systems solved a lot of problems, but created a lot of new ones." End of quote. The list of those problems is what you'd expect from any computer, or more specifically, any computer that's a decade or older. Most of these machines are running Windows XP, for which Microsoft hasn't released a security patch since April 2014. Researchers have demonstrated that many of them are susceptible to malware, or equally, if not more alarming, a well-timed denial of service attack. Quoting Norden again, "When people think that people think about doing something major to impact our election results at the voting machine, they think they'd try to switch results. But you can do a lot less than that and do a lot of damage. If you have machines not working or working slowly, that could create lots of problems too, preventing people from voting at all." End of quote. The extent of vulnerability isn't just hypothetical. Late last summer, Virginia decertified thousands of insecure win-vote machines. As one security researcher described it, quote-unquote, "Anyone within half a mile could have modified every vote undetected without any technical expertise." The vendor had gone out of business years prior. The win-vote systems are an extreme case, but not an isolated one. Other voting machine models have potentially vulnerable wireless components. Virginia's just the only one where a test proved how bad the situation was. The worst part about the current state of voting machines is that they don't even require outside interference to undo an election. Quoting Norden, "They're all computers. They run on tens of thousands of lines of code. It's impossible to have a perfectly secure, perfectly reliable computer." End of quote. The real danger of electronic voting systems, especially of those that can't be easily or effectively audited, is that you can't guarantee that there's been no tampering. And that, ladies and gentlemen, doesn't even discuss people like the President of the United States going around and telling people not to worry if you're an undocumented alien. Nobody is going to chase you up or count your vote. It doesn't include any of the issues pertaining to undocumented aliens being rounded up and shunted from one polling station to another, which has been shown to happen in the past and is more likely than ever to happen at this time. or the arrival of dead voters on the scene, complete with their votes as well. A really grim and nauseating spectacle, if you ask me. Voters fear the media far more than Russian hackers when it comes to tampering with election results. According to a Suffolk University USA Today poll, 46% of likely voters believe the news media is, quote-unquote, the primary threat that might try to change the election results. The national political establishment was the second most suspected group at 21%, and another 13% were undecided. Foreign interests, including so-called Russian hackers, ranked fourth with 10%, and what's described as local political bosses came in last with 9% of likely voters as the main threat to truthful election results. The poll results found 51% of likely voters were either very concerned or somewhat concerned about the possibility of violence erupting on election day or afterwards. The poll of 1,000 likely voters was taken between October the 20th and the 24th and followed the release of private emails by WikiLeaks that revealed cosy relationships between some prominent media stars and the Clinton campaign. The WikiLeaks dump also discovered Donna Brazile, the interim chairwoman of the Democratic National Committee, forwarded a debate question to Clinton that was later asked at a CNN Democratic town hall. Brazile at the time was a CNN contributor. The poll found 39% of likely voters believe the media is coordinating coverage with individual political campaigns, while 48% said the media is reporting, quote-unquote, completely of its own accord. The Gallup poll has found trust in the media to have sunk to a historic low. A September Gallup survey found that just 32% of American adults saying that they have a great deal or a fair amount of trust in the media, a number that has dropped 8 percentage points from last year. Well, ladies and gentlemen, political corruption is rampant, in case you hadn't noticed. It's just more sophisticated in the United States than elsewhere. The national debt is far higher than in most nations. There's been an alarming rise in civil asset forfeiture in the land of the free, and restrictions on bank withdrawals are growing. It's not like people don't know this. There are so many polls, for example, showing that Americans' trust in government and major institutions is at historic lows. But I find it fascinating that even though most people seem to acknowledge the risks and trends, they choose willfully to ignore them. People recognize the problem, but that's where the thinking stops. There's a major disconnect between problem and solution. That's probably because most citizens have been brainwashed for their entire lives that the way you solve these problems is by casting a vote. The reality is that this never works. Every election is always about change, yet every single time you just get more of the same, and usually worse. All that hope and change from Barack Obama ended up being an extra $10 trillion in debt, 500,000 plus pages of new rules and regulations, many more years of war, and more dismantling of your personal freedom. Rather than rely on an institution that overwhelmingly majority of people don't trust, your best bet is to rely on yourself. Just having a plan B can substantially mitigate these risks. The beauty is that there's no downside. It's hard to imagine that you'll be worse off for having access to another place where you and your family can safely go, live, work, invest, and do business. Prudent, logical planning will ensure you never become a victim of someone else's corruption or stupidity. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's it. We're at the end of another show and the beginning of something momentous in your lives that none of us either yet know or understand, though I fully agree that many people will be listening to this show after the elections have taken place. But nevertheless, understand we have reached a turning point, unexpectedly as it turns out, but definitively, in my opinion. You can't play with the statistics. They all tell the same story. A nation in decline, a people falling into poverty, and the end of an era. So, ladies and gentlemen, go about your business, do what you have to do, and I'll be back. We shall talk about the results on Friday. Until then, this is Richard Martin wishing you a wonderful week. Take care. Bye-bye.
And there you have it. You decide.